Hello and welcome to Unacademy, a one-stop destination for the English medium civil services aspirants. A very good morning and welcome to the most comprehensive Hindu analysis on YouTube. So let's start our discussion by first looking at the topics that we are going to discuss. From the Delhi edition of the Hindu, I have chosen 10 important articles. Let's cover all these articles in complete detail so that you don't have to go back and read the newspaper again. But before we start, I have a very important announcement. Unacademy will be conducting India's biggest civil services championship test tomorrow on the 11th of April. You will not only get a chance to attempt 50 MCQ questions, but you also stand a chance to win attractive rewards and scholarships. But the best part is that the top 32 performers would be chosen for a national level quiz competition that will be organized by Unacademy. They will be divided into 16 teams, and the top performing team stands a chance to win 5 lakh rupees in cash prize. Then the runner up team will win a cash prize of 2 lakh rupees, followed by team 3 and 4 winning a cash prize of 50,000 rupees. So, this is a great opportunity for students who are interested in not just preparing for the civil services exam, but students who have a passion for participating in quiz competitions. And by the way, your entire travel, accommodation, lodging, food cost would be borne by an academy. So, those interested, please check out the details in the link provided below and register for the test, which will take place at 11 a.m. and 5 p.m. tomorrow on the 11th of April. With this, let's get started and look at the first article. When you look at the supplement page of today's The Hindu, where Hindu publishes articles related to science and tech and environment and ecology, we have two very important articles that is relevant for our exams. Most students, they ignore this page altogether. But I've always told, please focus on this particular page, page 1 and 2, which are published as supplement pages in the online edition of the e-paper. This article today focuses on a very popular drug which has taken the medical world by storm, semaglutide. So, this is the active ingredient, the API, in popular products such as Ozempic or Wegovy. That is something I think many of you must be familiar with. It is the API for the popular GLP-1, which was developed and patented by Novo Nordisk, a Danish pharmaceutical company. So, this article has great relevance for science and tech, for healthcare, and especially in the Indian context. So, first, let's understand what is GLP-1, what is semaglutide, why is it such an important revolutionary drug, and why did it make such global headlines? GLP-1 stands for glucagon like peptide 1 receptor, because this drug is essentially designed to help tackle diabetes. It's an anti diabetic agent, primarily used in the management of type 2 diabetes. So, it was patented nearly 20 years ago and it was initially used largely for diabetes management. But over the years, doctors and researchers realized that this particular drug can have a much wider impact. It can address the very root cause of what we call as metabolic diseases or metabolic disorders, which is at the root of obesity, high blood pressure, type 2 diabetes, fatty liver, or excessive obesity impacting kidney and renal functions. All these are essentially symptoms of what is referred to as metabolic disease, which is rooted in excessive body fat. So, this particular drug, known by the popular brand name Ozempic or Wegovy, which is made up of semaglutide as its active pharmaceutical ingredient, was developed and patented by this Danish pharma major Novo Nordisk. Now, this drug has had a remarkable impact on patients. When it comes to treatment of these lifestyle related diseases, non communicable diseases, it could be hypertension, it could be excessive cholesterol, which could lead to cardiovascular diseases, or fatty liver disease, PCOS, and even terminal diseases such as cancer or type 2 diabetes. They're all interlinked to obesity, which is in turn a result of lifestyle and as well as genetics. So, the traditional approach to deal with these diseases was to look at them individually. A cardiologist would primarily handle hypertension, cardiovascular stress, and any heart related conditions. A diabetologist would focus primarily on treating diabetes to handle the insulin resistance and the glucose spikes. For fatty liver, it would be primarily gastroenterologists or liver specialists who would look at it. Then renal specialists would focus on kidney related dysfunction that would develop. Gynecologists would focus on PCOS. So this was not seen as the most effective form of treatment because collectively these diseases, they are largely a result of one's lifestyle, poor diet, sedentary lifestyle, lack of exercise, accumulation of body fat, and it's also a factor of genetics as well. So now doctors consider them to be a byproduct of metabolic disruption, which is triggered by excessive weight and body fat, which in turn leads to all these complications, and they're all interconnected. So, given this new approach to tackle non communicable diseases, drugs like semaglutide, known by the brand name GLP-1, Ozempic, Wegovy, they have been a revolutionary breakthrough because they don't just help manage diabetes, it addresses the very root cause of diabetes, which is obesity. You can call it as a disease modifying agent. So it's very different from a regular weight loss drug or a regular glucose control or diabetes control drug. It hits at the root cause itself to tackle obesity, which is resulting in metabolic syndrome, causing these related non communicable diseases. And the efficacy has been proven to be pretty amazing with regard to semaglutide. Clinical trials and eventual field deployment has shown that a 10 to 15% reduction can be achieved quite easily with semaglutide in body weight compared to baseline weight, especially when it is properly administered under medical supervision and following the right procedures. It is known to have a significant impact to help people lose weight as well. But however, this can't be seen as a shortcut or a bypass. It's not a cosmetic drug where you simply go and buy it off the counter and start administering it yourself. This has some serious side effects and implications if administered wrongly to the wrong patient. But definitely, it can help address the obesity burden which most countries are facing today, especially for countries like India. Across the world today, obesity and related metabolic diseases and non communicable diseases has become the biggest burden, even according to the World Health Organization. So, as a result, a drug like semaglutide has great significance. Its efficacy is proven, and under the right treatment protocol, it is very safe as well, achieving significant results, and thus it can elevate the stress on the healthcare system, providing much needed relief for patients who are struggling with obesity and all the related metabolic diseases from years and decades together. But however, the efficacy depends on several factors as well. For example, it depends on pharmacogenomics, which is how each person's body reacts to a particular treatment. Right? This is one of the key factors. Studies have found that pharmacogenomics plays a very big role in the eventual efficacy and the impact of semaglutide. Along with that, the tolerability to the drug and how easily a patient can tolerate higher doses of the drug. Because semaglutide has given better results and better efficacy with higher dosage. So, can a person adapt to higher doses? What's the tolerability to the drug? And how does the person's body react to it? These individualistic, subjective factors, of course, plays a big role. But when you look at its pricing, this particular drug was super expensive. It is administered as a pen, like how insulin shots are administered. And each pen, which is required for 1 month, would cost around 11,000 to 18,000 rupees in the market, which would be a prescription for 1 month period. The reason why it was so expensive was because the parent company that developed the drug, Novo Nordisk, held a patent. Obviously, the company would have invested millions of dollars in research to develop the drug, and it would have taken years and years of effort to bring it out into the market. And as per intellectual property rules and regulations, Novo Nordisk held a patent, and this patent has recently expired. Semaglutide is now off patent. Now, if you look at WTO rules on intellectual property rights, which is covered under the TRIPS agreement, trade related intellectual property rights, the minimum patent period prescribed by WTO is for 20 years from the filing date, not from the date patent is granted, but from the date on which the patent was filed for. From then, the minimum protection offered through WTO TRIPS is 20 years. This is seen as a fair protection of intellectual property, and after the patent expires, this becomes available in the public domain, meaning others can now produce generic variants of it. Governments can issue compulsory license, and through compulsory licensing, which is allowed under WTO TRIPS rules, other companies can start producing generic variants of patented drugs so that it becomes cheaper and affordable to the masses as well. Now, in India, we have the Indian Patents Act 1970. According to Section 53 of this Act, India aligns with the WTO TRIPS standards. And in India, the patents expire after 20 years from the filing date of the application. So this can itself come as a prelims question. Since Ozempic, GLP-1 have made such big news and the drug has now gone off patent, there can be a patent related question here. India has aligned with WTO TRIPS standards, and according to the Indian Patents Act, patents are valid for 20 years from the filing date of the patent application, not from the grant date. And the patent holders have to pay an annual renewal fee as well to keep on renewing the patent. And once the patent expires, evergreening is something which is looked down upon. Many companies try to make these superficial changes, claiming better efficacy or a new process in order to evergreen the patent, to keep on extending the patent. But this is something which is looked down upon, and usually such attempts are denied by the corresponding authorities. But once the patent expires, right, it becomes available in the public domain, and generic variants, generic copies of it can be produced, which will significantly bring down the cost. So this protects intellectual property, it protects innovation, creates an incentive for private companies, innovators, researchers. At the same time, it ensures that public priorities, health priorities are addressed. Right? Compulsory licensing is a great tool for governments to push for generic production of patented drugs. And once the patent expires, it's in the public domain, generic copies can be easily reproduced and sold in the market. So since semaglutide is now off patent, the cost, which was previously in the range of 11 to $18,000 per pen, or 18,000 rupees per pen, is coming down to 5,000 rupees per month. This would be the cost of the generic variant of semaglutide, which is now going to be produced by Indian pharma companies. More than 50 Indian companies have already jumped at this opportunity given the high demand that exists for semaglutide. So this is where we need to understand the implications of this on India's healthcare. What does it mean for diabetes patients in our country? What does it mean for tackling obesity in India and metabolic diseases in India? This could be a game changer. And that is why semaglutide is making global headlines since many, many months. See, first, of course, the patent holder will take a revenue hit. This is something which is obvious, right? Once the patent expires and generic copies are produced, definitely the top line of the company, the revenue will take a hit. That's why you see a fall in the shares of Novo Nordisk as well. But this serves a larger public purpose to make essential drugs cheaper, to make them affordable, to make it accessible to a common man. Because even for a middle class family, affording a drug which costs 11 to 18,000 rupees per month is quite expensive. Once the price goes down by more than half, it becomes much more accessible and affordable for the common people. Now, this, as I said, is very, very significant in the Indian context. The price reduction because of the generic copies, it has policy implications for our healthcare sector. Because according to WHO and according to the Ministry of Health and Family Welfare, India today faces one of the highest burden of obesity, type 2 diabetes, and metabolic disease, which is adding to the burden of non-communicable diseases in the country. So, with a drug like semaglutide, with the right administration and with the right monitoring of doctors, many, many, many patients in India, millions of them, could benefit from this. But again, as I said, there are conditions. See, Indians are prone to cardiovascular disease and the risk of diabetes. We are genetically prone. Compared to the rest of the global population and other ethnic groups, Indians in particular, we suffer from thin fat phenotype. A person might look thin, they may not be obese per se, but despite that, Indians tend to have a higher body fat percentage. See, the person might look very slim, they may not have excessive body weight, but the Indian genetic framework is such that most Indians have a lesser muscle ratio as compared to the body fat ratio, which tends to be on the higher side. And this makes Indians highly vulnerable for insulin resistance and throws them open towards the risk of type 2 diabetes and cardiovascular diseases. That's one reason why Indians suffer from a greater risk of cardiac arrest and heart attacks. Along with this, the poor lifestyle which has kicked in the last few decades, the poor diet, the consumption of high fat, high sugar, high salt food with sedentary lifestyle, with limited or no exercise, is contributing to the burden of obesity and metabolic diseases. And that is why semaglutide can be transformative for India's healthcare system. Now, the question is, can anybody take semaglutide? As I said, the answer is a clear no. This is not a shortcut, it's not a bypass to lose weight, and it's definitely not a cosmetic kind of drug. It's not your regular weight loss drugs, which have their own set of side effects. Semaglutide is specifically meant for certain category of patients who cannot lose weight easily, who are suffering from very high levels of type 2 diabetes and other related metabolic diseases. Someone who's very close to liver cirrhosis due to fatty liver condition, someone who is suffering from PCOS for months together, someone who is suffering from hypertension in combination with other metabolic diseases, including high cholesterol levels, which exposes them to high risk of cardiovascular disease. So, only for specific patients who meet certain criteria, this can be administered under careful doctor supervision. So, those who have a BMI of over 27, suffering from obesity related complications, those who have a BMI of over 30, even without diabetes, they are ideal patients for semaglutide, because lifestyle changes alone, if it's not yielding the results, any doctor would first recommend lifestyle changes to change your diet, to consume more protein, more fiber, reduce carb intake, and ensure that you stay away from processed food, stay away from high fat, high salt, high sugar food, and include some exercise. after trying out all of this, even then, if a person is failing to lose weight and they are suffering from multiple metabolic diseases, that's when this intervention is justified. It is like a bridge between lifestyle modification and bariatric surgery. Because the last option for a person with severe obesity and multiple metabolic diseases would be bariatric surgery for obesity management, where the stomach lining is pinned in a surgical procedure to reduce the size of the stomach, to reduce food intake and appetite, which could help in losing weight. But bariatric surgery is an extreme step, which comes with its own set of complications and side effects. So, semaglutide is like a perfect bridge in between lifestyle modification and bariatric surgery. As I said, this could be a big relief for many patients in the country who are struggling to lose weight despite trying everything, and those who are already suffering from multiple metabolic diseases. It does have some short-term to long-term side effects. Short-term side effects includes it could impact the gastrointestinal uh, network and systems. Your digestive system could take a hit because it primarily works by curbing your appetite. It works on the specific systems and hormones that regulate your appetite, reducing your food craving, reducing hunger, and it also empties the gastric bowel movement to reduce that craving for food. It controls the release of the gastric juices. So that's how this particular drug works. So obviously, it can interrupt the GI functioning, resulting in gastritis, diarrhea. But however, these are known to be short term side effects. Usually, the GI symptoms will reduce within few weeks of administering the drug. But there are some rare cases of complications that have developed, including eye related complication, pancreatic inflammation, thyroid tumors. But these are very rare exceptions. That is why this is not an off the counter drug. You can't simply go and take this and start injecting yourself, right? It's not a cosmetic drug. It's not a shortcut. It's not a bypass to lose weight. This is purely for patients with no other alternatives, and it has to be administered with supervision of doctors. But this can be a panacea for countries like India and most countries in the world today that are dealing with problem of obesity and metabolic diseases. It can be a lifesaver. So please take up this mains practice question. UPSC is known to pick up such trending topics from current affairs, especially in GS paper 3. So that's why I believe this topic can be very, very important. There can be a prelims question as well, be it on semaglutide or be it with regard to metabolic diseases or patent and the rules related to off patent or patent expiry. This is something which we learn from this important article. Now, moving on, we have another article on the supplement page related to environment and ecology and as well as healthcare. This article is focused on the impact of climate change on human health and how it is affecting healthcare systems across the world. How it has a disproportionate impact on the vulnerable and marginalized communities, especially poor people, women and children, senior citizens, those from remote areas, marginalized communities. They are at greater risk of health related complications arising out of climate change. So let's dive a little deep into this topic and I'll take you beyond the article as well. This is again a great essay topic or a mains related topic for GS paper 3 and even GS paper 2. So when you look at climate change, it is directly connected with extreme weather events. And this correlation is something which is established beyond reasonable doubt. There's enough scientific empirical evidence to establish this direct correlation between climate change and extreme weather events. Today, we are witnessing greater frequency of extreme weather events and greater intensity of extreme weather events, be it floods, cyclones, droughts, heat waves. There is a direct link that has been established between rising global temperatures and the overall disruption that's happening in our global climate and the increasing frequency and intensity of these extreme weather events. So this brings along with it, large scale destruction, because these disasters will cause loss of life, loss of property, infrastructure in the immediate um, in the immediate time period when the disaster strikes. But along with it, it brings several diseases that can have a lasting impact on human health and the healthcare system. Studies have shown that climate change linked extreme weather events, they're already resulting in the spread of more diseases, which is straining and burdening the healthcare system, especially the public healthcare system. Now take floods for example. Floods are known to bring waterborne diseases along with them. Because during every flooding season in India as well, if you take the monsoon season, if let's say Brahmaputra floods in the northeast, or in the Gangetic plains we have a major flood, probably the Kosi River or the Hooghly, or in the peninsular region, maybe Krishna, Godavari, or Kaveri is known to flood. During and after the flooding season, you see a big outbreak of waterborne diseases, especially cholera, hepatitis. There's a major outbreak of such waterborne diseases. We also see a bigger outbreak of vector borne diseases of late, such as mosquito borne diseases, including dengue and malaria. In fact, even in regions where these vector borne diseases were not common, such cases are coming up quite frequently. If you look at the Himalayan belt, places like Jammu and Kashmir, Shimla, they previously did not have much incidence of dengue and malaria. But of late, in the last 15, 20 years, major cases are coming up and localized outbreaks are being reported. And this again is linked with climate change and the related factors. Or if you take droughts and heat waves, it is known to cause dehydration, heat stroke, and causes significant cardiovascular stress. Heat waves can become very deadly and fatal very quickly, right? Dehydration can easily turn into a heat stroke, which can lead to shutdown of the internal organs due to a rise in internal body temperature. And it places significant stress on the cardiovascular system, leading to multi organ failure and eventual cardiac collapse. So many such cases are coming up and they're being documented with clear links to extreme weather events that are driven by climate change and global warming. Then look at how infant health and the health of pregnant women is also being affected, especially when it comes to respiratory conditions that are spreading, or how fetal development is getting affected, mainly because of severe air pollution, which is, of course, linked with climate change and global warming. Rising air pollution, rising levels of particulate matter, especially PM 2.5, has been directly connected with gestational hypertension amongst pregnant women, which in turn affects fetal growth and development, having a bigger impact on infant health. That's why vulnerable communities, marginalized sections are more vulnerable. It makes them all the more um, at greater risk. It places them at greater risk of being exposed to these diseases. So, if you take remote populations located far away from healthcare centers, those who don't have easy, affordable access to healthcare systems, women, children, rural pockets, those in the informal industry, those from marginalized communities, tribals, and the landless, for example, those from the backward classes, they cannot afford the higher cost of treatment in private healthcare. This is another concern. It has an economic impact as well because it increases out of pocket expenditure. Studies have shown that because of heat wave and heat stress, India alone has lost 160 billion labor hours in 2021, which means manual workers who have to carry out hard physical work out in the open, they were not able to carry out work and get paid because of extreme heat during the summer months. And lost labor hours means lost wages, which affects their economic stability, their livelihood, and their ability to access healthcare. It makes them vulnerable to diseases as well, reduces their income, creating this vicious cycle which can drive more and more people towards poverty, pushing them towards and below the poverty line. So these impacts have been clearly registered. A recent study has shown that every 1 degree Celsius increase in temperature can increase preterm birth during heat waves, premature delivery by 16%, which is a direct correlation again. And this has a bearing on infant health. And as infants are exposed to hazardous air, especially in parts of Delhi and northern parts of India, it is known to lead to asthma and other respiratory illness and affect lung function, because infants will not have fully developed lung function, and they cannot manage the higher blood pressure and the stress on the cardiovascular system. So, this has a direct bearing on the growth and development of a child, which can have a long lasting effect and even reduce life expectancy in the long run. So, that is the reason why this article is urging policymakers, it's urging the healthcare sector to prioritize health under climate policy. See, usually the health impact of climate change is seen as a secondary consequence, and it does thus gets a lower priority. But the editorial is urging to keep health as a central pillar in climate policy making, in climate action efforts. See, right now there are many deficiencies in our climate policies. Now, when you look at India, India has tried integrating the impact on human health and healthcare systems as an integral part of our climate policy. You look at the National Action Plan on Climate Change, or the state level climate action plans and the localized action plans that have been brought out. They try to incorporate human health as one of the key focus areas, and they prioritize local responses at the level of primary healthcare centers through local district level administration and grassroots administration. We have planned for intervention to ensure that vulnerable sections are protected and better healthcare outcomes are achieved despite the growing impact of climate change. But it is not enough, it is not sufficient. Given the rate at which global temperature is set to rise in the coming decades, it becomes all the more important to consider human health as a central pillar of climate policy making. See, right now, whatever funds are being provided for climate action, for disaster preparedness, it is primarily being used for mitigation efforts. There is a clear bias in climate funding and disaster funding towards mitigation to reduce the short term impact of disasters, to save lives in the immediate aftermath of a disaster. Of course, this has to be a priority, but adaptation measures are getting compromised. We need to adapt to the reality of climate change, along with mitigating the immediate short term impact of a disaster, of an extreme weather event. So, sufficient funding is necessary. We also need localized data. You need de-aggregated data at the grassroots level to understand how diseases are spreading as a result of extreme weather events. So, after every flood, after every cyclone, after every heat wave, there should be better localized data captured on how diseases have spread. The rise in incidents of cholera, outbreaks of dengue, malaria. This has to be better tracked, better monitored. And accordingly, local interventions have to be designed. But it requires a whole of society approach. Government alone cannot pull it off. You need the civil society, the healthcare system, the private healthcare system as well to work in coordination with the public healthcare system and climate policy makers. So that is what we take away from this article. And please take up this mains practice question for your answer writing practice. Now, moving on, we have a very interesting article on page 10 that focuses on India's Gaganyaan mission. ISRO is all set to take forward the first manned space flight mission of India, which is Gaganyaan, where three astronauts will be placed in low Earth orbit and most likely for a period of 1 week, and they'll make a re entry. So, as India gears up for this ambitious mission, multiple tests are being carried out before the actual manned mission, which is planned mostly for next year. ISRO has planned at least three sets of uncrewed mission. Before astronauts are sent out, which is a very risky mission, just the orbital module would be launched at least three times to test all the systems, especially the re-entry phase, which is one of the most dangerous and riskiest phase in case of manned space flight. The topic becomes even more important because currently, as we speak, We have another landmark mission, the Artemis mission of NASA, where NASA has placed astronauts around the moon and they're returning back very soon after orbiting around the moon, after having a fly past around the moon. So, in this context, re entry of such space vehicles and the safety of astronauts on board, how does the module re enter, the trajectory of it? What are the recovery and arrest systems to arrest the speed and velocity? All these systems can become very important, especially for prelims, more than mains. So let's quickly understand the systems which are at play. Now, when you look at the Gaganyaan mission, the orbital module, the OM, is made up of two components. You have a crew module that you can see here and a service module attached to it. The crew module is the habitat for the astronauts or the Gaganyatris as they are being referred to. The service module provides the life support and the logistics. So once the mission is launched and the orbital module completes its mission of orbiting around the Earth for a period of 1 week, eventually, as it prepares for re-entry, to re-enter the Earth's atmosphere, the service module is ejected. It is basically separated from the crew module. It's only the crew module which will make a re-entry and land on Earth. Is that clear? The service module will be separated and it will most likely burn up in the atmosphere. It will be deorbited, and as it makes a re-entry, since it will not have any additional protective measures, it's going to burn up in the atmosphere itself. But the crew module, which will be carrying the astronauts, will have to make a very calculated entry and landing. So how is this achieved? What technologies are involved? In 2007, ISRO first tested the space capsule recovery experiment, followed by the crew module atmospheric re-entry experiment in 2014. These two tests have successfully established ISRO's capabilities to control orbital re-entry while ensuring the safety of the module and the crew on board. Of course, these were uncrewed unmanned missions, and even the next three set of launches under Gaganyaan would be uncrewed missions. So once you achieve the separation of the service module from the crew module enters the Earth's atmosphere at a specific angle called the angle of attack. Because once it hits the atmosphere, the upper layers of the atmosphere, it will face tremendous friction, which will cause up massive heating to the range of 3000 degrees Celsius plus. That's why the crew module will be protected with special material, special ceramic tiles, which can withstand this immense heat that will be generated. Quite literally, the crew module will be set on fire as it enters the Earth's atmosphere. So the angle of attack, the angle at which it strikes the atmosphere and enters, breaches into the atmosphere, is absolutely critical. So this is where thrusters are used to align the module in the perfect angle, in the perfect direction, to achieve the ideal angle of attack so that the safety can be ensured while arresting the speed. See, while in orbit, the module would be flying at 7,800 meters per second, which is a tremendous velocity. And to achieve a soft landing, you know what should be the velocity eventually? The final velocity should be 1 to 2 meters per second if you're landing on terrestrial landing spots. If the soft touchdown is on land, then the velocity to be achieved is 1 to 2 meters per second. If you're planning a water splashdown, a splashdown in the open seas and the oceans, then you need a final velocity of 7 to 9 meters per second. Imagine a projectile traveling at 7,800 meters per second, making a violent entry into the Earth's atmosphere. You have to arrest the speed within few minutes and bring it down to hardly 7 to 9 meters per second or 1 to 2 meters per second, depending on where the touchdown is being planned. So how is this exactly achieved? What systems are at play? This is where you need to understand that any re-entry of a crew module turns this object into a semi-ballistic body. What do you mean by that? If you understand ballistic trajectory, which is followed by your ballistic missiles as well, they take a parabolic path. Let's say a ballistic missile, which is launched outside of the Earth's atmosphere for a brief period, it enters the exo-atmosphere. It basically enters space briefly and makes a re-entry. But the re-entry is largely a free fall. The ballistic missile, once it recurves and re-enters the Earth's atmosphere, it's largely in a free fall mode, which makes it a pure ballistic object. So any object, when it cannot steer by itself, right, when it enters into almost like a free fall and faces air resistance or drag in the atmosphere, that is referred to as a ballistic body. That's why ballistic missiles are more vulnerable for air defense systems. It's quite easy to predict their path and even intercept them and take them out through your air defense systems. Whereas a crew module in a space mission, it enters as a semi-ballistic body because it is entering at a specific angle, the angle of attack, which is controlled by the onboard thrusters. And there are mechanisms to control its direction and speed to slow down and arrest the system. So as it enters at hypersonic speeds in the range of 7,800 meters per second, multiple systems will have to be deployed to slow it down to 1 to 2 meters per second or 7 to 9 meters per second. But first, let's understand on what basis space agencies decide whether it should be a land touchdown or a water splashdown. This depends again on a number of practical factors. Now, when you take Russia, China, and their crewed space mission, Russia uses the Soyuz. China has the Shenzhou modules as part of their manned space flight. Both Russia, China prefer a land touchdown. Why is that? That's mainly because they have sufficient open land. You need empty plains or desert areas with no habitation, no crowded population, no buildings, and you need a stretch of several hundred kilometers because you can't aim for a bullseye. It's not that it'll land specifically at a correct spot, which is predetermined. That's not how space reentry works. Unlike your targetable missiles, right, where the missile can be reoriented, maneuvered mid-flight, and you can hit specific targets. You can't do that with space reentry. So there is a wide path which is open, and the landing can happen anywhere. And it's very hard to predetermine this. Of course, you can zero it down to a certain elliptical path, but beyond that, you don't know where exactly the landing will happen. So you need a very vast open territory free of human population and human habitation. So countries like Russia, China can afford to do it, given the massive size of their country and the availability of open, empty deserts and plains. They plan for land touchdowns, which is easier for them to achieve. For China, Gobi Desert is readily available. Russian missions are primarily through Kazakhstan in Central Asia, where Russia has its cosmodrome. So there are enough free areas available to achieve a land touchdown. But other countries which have a constraint with regard to availability of such free open land, they prefer a water splashdown. And it's not just about geography, it's about the engineering as well. For a land touchdown, you need more systems in place to slow it down to 1 to 2 meters per second. Because on land, even a touchdown at 10 meters per second can be quite dangerous. It can become a hard landing and it can even damage the system, causing impact for the astronauts. So the speed should come down to 1 to 2 meters per second. So just deploying parachutes would not be enough. I'm sure you must have seen visuals of such re-entry. Once the right angle of attack is achieved, right? This helps in aero braking. Aero braking is the first step to slow down the speed, which is a natural process. Once you achieve the right angle of attack, and once the module is protected from the extreme heat because of the special protection through ceramic tiles, the atmosphere itself acts as a natural brake to cut and arrest the speed. This is called aero braking, right? as the module encounters the atmosphere and the friction provided by it and slows down. This natural braking is called aero braking. But once the module is around 12 kilometers above the surface, that is when the further arrest of the speed should happen. That's where the parachutes are deployed. Multiple parachutes are in place to quickly arrest the speed and slow it down. But even this is not enough. For a land based touchdown, since the velocity should come down to 1 to 2 meters per second, at the last minute, on-board rockets or reverse thrusters are fired. You have these retro rockets, as they are called, which fire in the reverse direction. And they help in arresting the speed at the last minute and bringing it down to just 1 to 2 meters per second to achieve a safe and soft touchdown. But in case of water, you don't have to worry so much. A water landing is much more safer relatively compared to a land touchdown. Even with a velocity of 7 to 9 meters per second and without the need for retro rockets or thrusters, you can still achieve a safe landing with just parachutes. Why? Because water is a great absorber of energy. Even if the splashdown is at 7 to 9 meters per second, the energy gets dissipated as water will absorb that. But when you land in water, there are other challenges which will come up with regard to identifying the location and carrying out a recovery. As I was mentioning, these touchdowns, be it on land or on water, it happens over a large elliptical area. Let's say the crew module is first taking this semi-ballistic path. It is estimated to land at a certain point, but it can never hit the bullseye. It can't have a predetermined landing location. It will have this elliptical path where the touchdown might happen, because there are many factors in the atmosphere which can influence the direction in a linear manner. Either it will fall short of the determined location or it might overshoot the determined location, but it will fall within that elliptical path which is identified. Because there is atmospheric drag, the density of the atmosphere, and the localized weather conditions, they all play a role in where exactly the touchdown might happen. But what is good is that the lateral movement is minimal. The lateral movement is minimal. It will not fall outside of this ellipse or on the other side of the ellipse. It will fall within this narrow elliptical path, but in a linear direction, it can vary a few hundred kilometers. So that's why the module is fitted with a GPS location transmitter and multiple beacons which will keep pinging the location. So this will be picked up by satellites, which are and even flights which are put in at the time, and even drones. They can pick up the beacon signal and the positional information provided through GPS signals. This will help narrow down the exact location once the splashdown or landing has happened, right? So what is India planning for? India is not planning for a land touchdown because we don't have such free open land area. So the best option for us is a water splashdown, and Bay of Bengal is the chosen site. So in Bay of Bengal, ISRO has identified the narrow elliptical path where the landing, the splashdown is likely to happen. So this stretches over several hundred kilometers, and the entire task of identifying the module and recovering it safely will be with the Indian Navy. Indian Navy would be the lead agency working with ISRO and other stakeholders to execute this complex mission. Once the splashdown is achieved and the location signals are picked up by our satellites, aircraft, and drones, the Navy will quickly move into position and naval divers are deployed. Specialist divers, most likely from Marcos, the Marine Commandos, would be deployed, who will approach the crew module, and the module would have detached the parachutes automatically. Because see, there is one risk. Sometimes parachutes will get entangled, and you can't afford that. And you might have a counterpoint. You might say, why have thrusters and so many complex technologies? Why can't we have large parachutes? But please understand the physics behind it. There is an inverse relationship between the drag area and the surface area of the parachute that's required. If you want to achieve a quicker drag, the parachute size has to increase enormously. And it's not practical to put up a huge parachute for a small crew module. There is a bigger risk of entanglement as well. It doesn't make practical sense. That's why relatively smaller parachutes are used. There will be multiple chutes just to ensure fail-safe systems and build redundancy. Even if one fails, others will deploy. But still, the system has to be very small. And once the right splashdown is achieved, the parachutes will automatically detach and they'll break away from the module. And there's another automatic system which kicks in, the flotation devices, the flotation buoys. They'll automatically deploy to prevent any sinking of the crew module. The astronauts can't open the latch and get out on their own. They'll have to wait for the recovery team, the team of naval divers, to arrive. And this might take some time. It might even take more than an hour, or stretching even to a couple of hours. So, for that period, the crew module will have to sustain for itself. That's why these flotation buoys get automatically deployed. And for easy identification, it has several other built-in uh, protocols. For example, it is painted with international orange, which is a standard standout color. And it also emits a green fluorescent dye into the water. Automatically, once splashdown happens, a green colored dye is released into the water so that from the air, aircrafts and drones which are looking for it, they will identify the dye which will stand out on the indigo blue color of the water. Plus, there are strobing lights for night time. What if the splashdown is post evening in the dark, right? It has green strobe lights which keep flashing, which can be picked up visually. Plus, naval spotters will try to physically spot this module as well. So, multiple methods are deployed, and very quickly, a ship will approach the module and they will winch this on board a ship or a naval vessel, and then the crew would be off boarded. So, this is the complex process of re entry and recovery. The reason why we are discussing this in detail is that any of these systems and technologies can come as a prelims question. And just the other day, ISRO has conducted the second successful integrated airdrop test, where the crew module was dropped from a very high altitude by a Chinook helicopter to test the parachutes and all the recovery and safety systems that are designed for a water splashdown. These tests are very critical. ISRO had already conducted one such test. Now, the second successful integrated airdrop test has been carried out by the Indian Air Force, where the crew module suspended by a Chinook helicopter has been dropped from a high altitude into the Bay of Bengal. And the parachutes have deployed on time, achieved the drag that was necessary, the braking which was necessary, bringing down the speed of the module to just 7 to 9 meters per second. And all the recovery and safety systems have worked perfectly, which means now the mission is ready for the next stage, where uncrewed missions would be carried out. 3 uncrewed flight are planned before the actual manned mission can be taken up. Now, coming to the next article, a very interesting article by Suhasini Haider. So, this article focuses on the incredible brave work of Indian diplomats, the IFS officers, the work they carry out in war zones, in conflict zones, right? So, this is a reminder for civil services aspirants as well, a story of inspiration of the remarkable brave work done by our diplomats, which often goes unnoticed, unreported. So, when you look at the current raging conflicts in the world, be it in Ukraine, be it in Iran or Israel or Lebanon, obviously there are Indian embassies, consulates located right in the midst of the war zone. But Indian diplomats can simply, they cannot abandon the mission, right? Just because there is a threat, just because there's a raging conflict on the outside of the compound of our diplomatic premises, doesn't mean they can pack their bags and leave. It doesn't work that way for any diplomats across the world, right? So they have to hold ground, keep representing India, maintain channels of communication with the government, if required, establish contact with rebel groups, and ensure the safety of the Indians, plan their evacuation, and keep the channels of communication open with the government that is in power. Or if it's like a civil war situation, if required, you may even have to engage with rebel forces to ensure the safety of Indian nationals and the protection of Indian interests. So there are many, many instances where Indian diplomats have displayed this exemplary bravery. And this article is a tribute to these IFS officers. So when we talk about this, one incident which is something should be mentioned is the 2008 bombing of the Indian embassy in Kabul, a dastardly terror attack aimed at the Indian embassy at the behest of Pakistan's ISI. The ISI had sponsored a Talibani faction known as the Haqqani Network, which operates in the Afpak border areas or in the tribal belt near Peshawar. And Haqqani Network is known to be an anti-India terror proxy used by Pakistan to target India, mainly to target Indian interests in Afghanistan. Because see, between 2001 to 2021, India had built formidable presence in Afghanistan. We had invested $3 billion in multiple projects. India had multiple diplomatic missions. Apart from the embassy in Kabul, we had 4 consulates in Kandahar, Herat, Jalalabad, and Mazar-e Sharif. We had a huge diplomatic presence in the country, including IFS officers, military attaches, intelligence officers, Indian engineers, and as well as some Indian security personnel from ITBP. ITBP commandos were also deployed at these missions to offer security and protection to the Indian diplomats. But this deadly bombing of our embassy caused widespread destruction of the diplomatic premises. And many brave diplomats and soldiers made a supreme sacrifice. Brigadier Ravidat Mehta, who was India's defense attaché, Indian diplomat V. Venkateshwar Rao from the IFS, and 2 ITBP commandos lost their lives in this deadly attack. So this highlights the risk that IFS officers go through, and we have seen this multiple times. For example, you take the civil war that broke out in Libya in 2011 following the Arab Spring Revolution. As NATO prepared for a massive military attack against Gaddafi's regime, Indian diplomats had to hold the ground and help in carrying out Operation Safe Homecoming, which was executed by the then Manmohan Singh government in order to evacuate and rescue around 15,000 Indians, primarily nurses, doctors, and other Indian workers who were trapped in Libya. Though there was street fighting taking place, massive militia attacks happening right outside the embassy compound, IFS officers had to hold the ground, ensure that our presence was maintained. We saw this in Lebanon as well during the 2006 war when Israel invaded into southern Lebanon to target Hezbollah, very similar to what's happening today. Large scale bombings were happening in Beirut, and even then, IFS officers held their ground, and all the Indian embassy staff held their ground, helping in Operation Sukoon to evacuate 5,000 Indians, along with many foreign nationals. And after that, they went back to the mission. It's not that they were evacuated, right? The officers will have to go back and man the mission and hold the ground. We saw this in Syria for more than a decade. From 2011 till date, Syria has been seeing intense conflict, and our embassy at Damascus has held its ground. Our diplomats have not even been fully evacuated. We have maintained a skeletal staff and maintained a permanent presence. Afghanistan is another case where evacuations were done. But despite the complicated history of Afghanistan, we have carried out diplomatic evacuation only 4 times. Only 4 times in the last 40, 50 years, Indian diplomats have been evacuated. So even during times of war, even when Taliban took over the country, Indian diplomats continued to stay on to plan the evacuation and execute Operation Devi Shakti in 2021 when Taliban again took over the country. The embassy and consulates were shut down later, but they continued to maintain the presence and hold the ground. And once we re-established ties and contacts with Afghanistan through engagement with Taliban, Indian diplomats have returned back to Kabul despite the heightened risk which is present. So you see this in Yemen as well, where India has continued to maintain its diplomatic presence given the stakes and interests that we have. So there are many high-risk postings. So from countries like Pakistan to Libya to Syria to Yemen, these are high-risk postings where usually families are not allowed. These are non-family stations where only the diplomats can be stationed, but not their entire families, because that would be a heightened risk. But if you take current war zones like, let's say, Israel itself, which has become a war zone, or let's say even Iran, and this is where Indian mission staff, not just the IFS officers, even the junior level staff, they are showing exemplary bravery to keep the Indian flag flying high. And this is a reminder of the incredible career that is offered through the Indian Foreign Service. See, I'm not telling this to scare you away, right? This is the ground reality, but this is the supreme utmost service to the nation as you uphold the Indian flag abroad, even during difficult circumstances, protecting India's national interests. I think this should be a great source of inspiration and motivation for lakhs of civil services aspirants. Next, on the front page, we have an article referring to a report by the World Bank. See, the World Bank publishes this important report called the India Development Update Report. Please make a note of this, very important for prelims. The India Development Update Report is published by World Bank as an extension of the South Asia Economic Update. See, for the entire South Asia region, World Bank publishes a economic update, a periodic economic update. This is done for many other regions of the world as well. Now, in the South Asia Economic Update, there is a specific publication on India Development Update Report. So this basically tells you the trajectory of growth in South Asia region and particularly in India, and what challenges are being faced. So World Bank has basically downgraded the GDP growth for India from the earlier 7.2% to just 6.6% for the current fiscal. It's a reduction of 0.6 percentage points. And this is a direct outcome of the ongoing war in West Asia. This helps quantify the economic impact on India. A 0.6 percentage reduction just because of the war is a massive impact. And only US and Israel can be blamed for this. Because of the disruption in supply chain of oil, gas, fertilizers, and other key commodities, it will have a cascading effect on industries, on domestic demand, on India's employment market. So this will have a long lasting effect, lasting several months, probably running to the end of this year and extending to the next year as well. So estimates of World Bank indicate India will suffer a downward projection of growth by 0.6%. And this is something which India should anticipate. There are measures to be taken through domestic support to instigate private investments, to boost domestic demand, to create jobs, to drive up employment locally. And this can happen only with government support and monetary policy support from the RBI. So, with the right intervention from the central bank and the government of India, we can avert the crisis. We can try to at least mitigate the overall economic damage on the Indian economy. So, there are two, three things you learn from this article. One, the impact of West Asia war on Indian economy, and who publishes these reports, and what can be done to minimize the impact of this war on India. Now, coming to the prelim section, we have few small articles, but very interesting articles. On the front page, the Hindu has published this image of a seaplane landing in the Ganga River. Now, this is a historic moment for India, for India's transportation and connectivity. The Modi government has prioritized all forms of transport mode and connectivity modes. After focusing on highway development, after focusing on railway development and other forms of transportation, including improved civil aviation connectivity, we are now prioritizing seaplane services, something which India was lacking. Seaplanes are essentially amphibious aircraft which can land and take off on water. If you've ever been to Maldives or such island locations, you often come across such seaplane services. And there is a great potential for this in India, especially to connect remote, unconnected regions, or to connect regions with difficult terrain where large water bodies are readily available, or even to boost tourism. There are several large lakes, rivers, waterbeds in India, and even in locations like Lakshadweep, in Andaman Nicobar Islands, in the northeastern part of India, where connectivity is difficult because of the difficult terrain and remoteness, as well as in the Gangetic plains, in many parts of peninsular India as well, where adequate connectivity is not available, seaplane services could be a remarkable feature to add to our transport network. And this is the first time a commercial seaplane test has been carried out. Please note down where the landing happened. It was over the Ganga River at Pashulok Barrage in Rishikesh in Uttarakhand. So, with this successful commercial test flight, many more routes will be opened up very soon in the coming months and years. Next, there's an article on page 4 referring to the honorific title accorded to one of India's legendary freedom fighter, V.D. Savarkar, who is also popularized by the name Swatantryaveer. But there's a lot of controversy surrounding uh, this title, which was given to V.D. Savarkar, Swatantryaveer, and it has been politicized. There's a lot of uh, claims and counterclaims as well. But without getting into the politics of it, it's important to understand as to who gave this honorific title to V.D. Savarkar, the term Swatantryaveer, because there are allegations that Savarkar had given this to himself. But most scholars who believe in authoritative historical sources, they believe that the term Swatantryaveer, the title, was given by Sadashiv Ranade. Sadashiv Ranade, who wrote a biography about V.D. Savarkar. In this biography, Sadashiv Ranade refers to him as Swatantryaveer, and this is considered to be the most authentic source. Though it has been challenged politically and legally, most historians and authoritarian sources believe that it was Sadashiv Ranade in the biography on V.D. Savarkar who used this honorific title, Swatantryaveer. Next, India's first quantum reference facility is all set to be inaugurated in Andhra Pradesh. Andhra Pradesh is taking the first major leap compared to any other Indian state in the field of quantum computing. The credit largely goes to the visionary farsightedness of leaders like Chandrababu Naidu, who engineered the IT revolution of Andhra Pradesh. And now Andhra Pradesh is taking the lead in quantum computing as well. A quantum reference facility will basically act like a test bed to test out components of a quantum computing facility. As India prioritizes critical emerging technologies such as quantum computing, the state of Andhra Pradesh is taking the lead with the first ever quantum reference facility coming up in the state of Andhra Pradesh. So, what's a quantum reference facility? It's basically a test facility where components used in quantum computing are tested out. Next, there is this interview that Hindu has published with experts, legal constitutional experts, on the topic of Indian elections and how they are influenced with money power. So I'll not go into the details of the article. We have discussed this multiple times in the past. But the article mentions a very unique term, plutocratic. Are Indian elections becoming plutocratic? So this brings up the term plutocracy into our focus. So this will not only help you improve your vocabulary, but it will help you understand a slightly technical term. There can be a prelims question asking, what do you mean by a plutocracy? A plutocracy is where a democracy is being subverted, a democracy is being eroded, mainly with the use of money power by the rich, elite, well connected politicians who are manipulating elections with their money power. See, Election Commission of India clearly has set a limit on electoral expenditure for the party and the candidates at the constituency level. There's a certain limit for MLA elections, assembly elections, a certain limit for Lok Sabha elections. Now, can you find out what is this limit? The expenditure limit set by the Election Commission of India for each assembly constituency and for each Lok Sabha constituency. The limit is just a few lakh rupees. But we all know the reality, what happens on the ground. Most candidates and the parties that are backing them and the sponsors who are backing them, they end up splurging crores and crores of rupees. There are very troubling reports, very credible reports that candidates might be spending in the range of anywhere between even 50 to 100 crores just to win one seat. So, such naked, blatant display of money power to swing elections in favor of a candidate or a party is referred to as a plutocracy, a plutocratic system, where money power has been eroding democratic elections. It corresponds very closely to oligarchy as well. See, oligarchy is slightly different, where elections are funded by the ultra rich billionaires, ultra rich conglomerates or businessmen who are close to the political establishment. If the funding is primarily through them and if they largely control the politics and the elections in the state, such a state is often referred to as an oligarchy. Something what you see in Russia, for example, right, where the Russian oligarchs close to Kremlin, close to Russian leaders like Putin, they win favorable deals and contracts and in turn fund and sponsor the leader and the party. So a plutocracy is slightly different, where rich elite politicians and ultra rich individuals only they can contest elections. A common man, even a middle class or someone from upper middle class, can't hope to contest elections in India. That has become the ground reality in many constituencies because you have candidates splurging 50, 100 crores and swinging elections in their favor. And such a system is referred to as a plutocratic system. Next, on page 16, there's this article referring to the dispute in South China Sea between Philippines and China, where China claims the entire Spratly Island group to itself. And China has been super aggressive to assert its claims, resorting to even aggressive military tactics. So Philippines has tried countering the military aggression of China, and it has set up and opened a major Coast Guard base on a strategic island known as the Thitu Island. So you have to be aware of the location of Thitu Island for a map-based question or places in news type of question. So I'll show you the map of this region. See, this map clearly shows the South China Sea and the 9-dash line, the so-called 9-dash line of China. This U-shaped 9 dashes represents China's territorial claims in South China Sea. This goes against the provisions of UN Convention on Law of the Sea. It violates the territorial claims of countries like Vietnam, Philippines, Brunei, Malaysia, Indonesia. And there are multiple disputes that are present over here. So now we are just focusing on the Spratly group of islands that are located over here. You can see the Spratly group, and there are many small islets, reefs, sandbanks that are located. So the Spratly dispute is essentially between China on one side with Philippines, Vietnam, Malaysia, Indonesia, Brunei on the other side. They all have conflicting territorial claims. Now, with regard to China-Philippines dispute, Thitu Island is at the center of the conflict which is taking place here. It has to be seen as a forward operating base of Philippines. Philippine sovereignty is recognized under international law. Philippines used to maintain a big military presence, but China has openly challenged this. Recently, China has even occupied a sandbank called Sandy Cay Reef, which is close to Mischief Reef, which is also at the heart of the dispute between the two sides. You can also see the Scarborough Shoal over here in this map, which was adjudicated in 2016 by the Permanent Court of Arbitration. It was arbitrated by the PCA, which awarded Scarborough Shoal to Philippines, and it did not recognize China's claims. It ordered China to give up the claims over Scarborough Shoal and recognize the claims of Philippines. But China rejected this award by the PCA. So all these locations that you see here are very, very important. So this is where Philippines has built a key Coast Guard base at Thitu Island. Regular flash-offs or regular standoffs take place here between the Chinese Navy, Coast Guard, and their irregular militia. Even Chinese fishermen are trained to act as a private militia to use boats to threaten the vessels of other countries like Philippines and Vietnam. They even crash into their vessels, and they try to intimidate them. So this form of military aggression and gray zone warfare has become quite common in this region. That is why all these locations are very, very important. Just be aware of the location and the nearby areas that are located in South China Sea. So, on this note, I bring my analysis to an end. I hope it was an interesting and insightful discussion. If you liked it, do press the like button, share your comments, and don't forget to subscribe to our channel. Thanks for watching.